and welcome to the World War I stream. It's Fadi von Bumstink, and I'm joined here with MC. Dodge is still tramping across the countryside looking for his long-lost family, and not sure what's happening to Falcon today. For this episode, we're just going to go with the usual format, July, August 1917. We'll just go over a few of the notable points and whatnot. If you do like the specials that we've been doing lately, let us know. We might do some more of them in depth. Okay, take it away, mate. MC.
Okay, go ahead and share the screen, and we'll start with July 1st. July 1st, Manchu Emperor Hassan Fung restored in China. All right, now the Manchu Emperor is going to be overthrown in another 20 years as Japan goes back and reinvades.
Well, this guy in particular will actually resign in under a month.
Right, agreement signed at The Hague for the exchange of combatant and civilian and British and German prisoners of war. Now, this is actually kind of the basis, really, for treatment of prisoners of war. There was really not a lot that had been done up to this point about how prisoners of war are going to be treated, and it's these agreements that are eventually going to come to the front and create basically what we call the Geneva Conventions.
Yep.
Geneva Conventions of War. So these are the first attempt at this. Right?
A lot of what's prompted this is basically there are so many prisoners on each side, and particularly for the Germans, a vast lack of combat ready troops and whatnot. They can't really afford to guard these people anymore.
Yeah. Okay. On July 2nd, you also have the first regular convoy of merchant ships sails from Hampton Roads, Virginia. It's experimental convoys that have been tried in May. Convoys are outward from Great Britain did not start until August. Okay, so regular convoys are now beginning where they've taken the ships now, the merchant ships, and they said, okay, you have to be in a convoy system. We are not going to tolerate, the combatants are no longer going to tolerate not going in convoys. Then they're basically telling the insurance companies that are insuring these ships that they don't have to pay off if they get sunk and they're not in convoys. So that's kind of important.
It also ensures continuity of the actual cargo that's being sent.
That's true. That's true. Then now going to the next one, we have Ponta Delgada. All right, is shelled by a German submarine. Okay, this is the dreaded response of the Germans to the Portuguese entering the war on the side of the Allies. Let's be perfectly honest here. All right, being shelled is, it shows action, but it's really not, how in the long term, what was the effect? Pretty much nothing, right? Then the concerted effort by the German submarines on the U.S. transports is defeated, right? Because the weight of the U.S. Navy now is being brought to bear, and it's having, with the number of destroyers and so forth and escorts, it's not just the British ships that they have to worry about anymore. I really can't explain just how important having the U.S. Navy add its numbers of ships, which were they weren't comparable to even the Germans at the time as far as the numbers, but the fact that they were new, and the fact that they then were added directly to the British, what could be considered the British fleet, it really changed the dynamic. At this point, go ahead.
Yeah, it stifles some tactics like what you'll see in World War II, like wolf packs and things like that, because there are just so many ships protecting the convoys now that a couple of them can be sent off to go and chase down a submarine here, and you still have a protective line around the convoys, and that can take on other attacks and whatnot.
It also helps that just that fact alone ends any chance that the high seas fleet is going to do any kind of sortie, because now you're not dealing with just the British fleet. the British home fleet no longer has to stay perfectly alone, waiting for the high seas fleet. They've got a lot more options now because with the American surface ships to help, they're freed up for other duties as well.
Yep.
So it pretty much ends any chance that Germany's high seas fleet can do anything, can change the course of the war. Jutland then becomes their only, the only battle, major naval battle that anyone talks about as a result.
And this will also cause a bit of dissent in the German Navy, which we'll see a little bit later in this episode.
Okay. All right. Aqaba is occupied by Arab forces. Do you want me to bring up your map?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's bring up Ramadi, if I can. All right, there you go.
And we have Falcon.
Hey,
sorry,
Falcon.
I'm a little late. I've been running around getting stuff together for family.
Yeah,
That's all good, man.
I see your icon includes a roll of toilet paper.
It's a hand-knitted roll of toilet paper.
It's a present from his nana.
Dude, I wish she knitted. She'd more likely do my taxes. In fact, she actually did that 2 years ago.
Okay, you want to go over this operation at Ramadi here?
Well, I honestly didn't really look that much into it.
Well, this is basically the push, all right, the continuation of the push, right, from Mesopotamia. This is part of the Persian contingent where the British are pushing the Ottoman Turks, all right, completely out. At the time when the Ottoman Turks were having success because the Russians are redeploying and basically pulling out of Persia. At that same time, however, the British forces are moving in through the Euphrates Valley and are now retaking everything that they had lost prior to that.
And this is because it's so far to the east of like Palestine and all that kind of stuff. This is a lot of what T.E. Lawrence has been doing, which we will be getting onto that in more in depth in a special later on.
Yeah, we need to talk about that and the Balfour Agreement and how all that plays out. All right, but we'll do that closer to the end of the war. All right, but it does need to be discussed. But as you can see, the main emphasis here is that once again, there's two major fronts of this war. Well, in actuality, there's three. There's the Western Front, which is basically the slog that the trench warfare that everyone's trying to break through. You have the Eastern Front of the Germans against the Russians and the Austro-Hungarians against the Russians and their allies. And then you have the push against the Ottoman Turks. And this is the third front here, is the Ottoman Turks. And of all the nations that are really getting the crap kicked out of them, all right, that are really suffering, the Ottoman Turks are suffering the most. They're the ones losing the most territory.
Well, they're also the least experienced and least well equipped of the Central Powers forces as well. They basically had the idea like Italy did in World War II, where we're technologically advanced enough and we've got these allies, so we can go and take on. Oh, actually, no, we can't.
They just didn't have. I mean, let's be honest. They had no industrial base. The biggest problem is, of course, even Austro-Hungary doesn't have the industrial base that Germany has. Germany is the big powerhouse industrial base for the Central Powers. But the Ottoman Turks really had basically nothing. Which is unfortunate because as far as for this time frame, they have the material. They've got the mineral wealth to actually have been far more industrialized than they were.
And what really did stifle them militarily was that a lot of their weapons and all that kind of stuff was being given by the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans. And once they got basically encumbered with the Russians and with Britain and all that, the supplies pretty much almost dried up for the Ottomans.
Now, it made it very difficult. There was no direct logistical chain that they could function through.
Farty and I, Freddie and I, not too long ago, had a conversation specifically about logistics and warfare. Yeah, your better equipment can win a battle, but logistics makes a big difference. Back in 1914, the Fokker Eindecker was not the best airplane, not complicated at all, but that's just why that extreme simplicity and being so easy to build, maintain, and fly is what caused the Fokker scourge.
And you might be asking yourselves, but hang on, how come the Ottomans were so successful, especially like with, say, Tobruk, for example, against the Australians, New Zealanders, and the British, and against naval vessels and all this kind of stuff? Yeah, they were basically just following what Napoleon said: never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake.
And that's one of the things that they to say that the Allies were, well, they're the Allies. They're always right. No, they made a lot of mistakes. You could always point to mistakes. Now, some of that's hindsight, but some of it shouldn't have been hindsight. Some of it should have been, known what was going to happen as a result. So, okay. We have the conscription bill carried into the Canadian House of Commons. So basically, they are now in the drafting people.
Yep, and this is still the same as when Britain and Australia introduced conscription only a few months ago in this timeline. It is a simple thing of this war was supposed to have ended a couple of years ago. They were all supposed to be home by Christmas, and now it's not so much, and they've had a lot of people killed, and they really do need to bolster their own forces, if not for the war, but just for their own sort of defense and all this kind of stuff.
Yep. Okay, and now we're going to go to Li Yuanhong. President of China resigns and is succeeded by Feng Kuo-cheng. All right, so basically China's been destabilized completely. All right, and the biggest player in that destabilization, of course, is Japan, and Japan is forcing China to make different concessions. All right, it's going to come to a head, which is going to lead to China being, for all intents and purposes, attempted to be annexed by Japan.
This wasn't also helped because this is only 17 years after the Boxer Rebellion, which was instigated by the British, mainly.
Well, it was instigated. I don't know if it was by the British, but the British kind of were the cause of it.
Yeah.
I don't think they intended for there to be a Boxer Rebellion, but it was their actions that basically caused it. All right, now we have July 7th, and this is Falcon's Realm now.
Yep.
A severe aeroplane raid on England, Moret and London. Casualties 250, mostly civilians. Last on London by daylight.
Okay.
Yeah, the British have finally realized, not the British, the Germans have finally realized the effectiveness of the airplane, and now they're really starting to use it, and they're really, well, for lack of a better term, of a better word, a better way to put it, they've tasted blood.
Well, it sounds like, from this perspective, it looks like the British decided they were actually going to start fighting back because they were getting tired of getting bombed.
Basically, they're going, oh, shit.
All right, the Manchu Emperor abdicates. This is the Manchu Emperor that was just just put in place. The Russian forces begin their withdrawal from Western Persia. Kasir-i-Shirin, which is one of the few. This was one of the few bright spots by the Russian forces, and now the Russian forces are giving it up. Then you have the HMS Vanguard, sunk by an internal explosion in Scapa Flow.
Yep, it was actually a series of magazine explosions that detonated, and the ship pretty much sank almost instantly. They only had 3 survivors out of, I think it was 830 odd crew. And it was later found out this wasn't sabotage; it was due to faulty cordite.
Faulty cordite, or was it cordite handling? I mean,
well, your cordite's not really supposed to detonate by itself.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Yeah, you don't want your explosives just blowing up on its own when you're handling it.
Yeah, like the gunpowder, especially cordite, is supposed to be really stable and should be able to take a fair pounding and all this. So if you just happen to drop a shell or a casing or something like that, it shouldn't go off. However, if you do have some impurities in it, like take for instance like the sweating issue that TNT has, it wasn't made properly and all this, and some form of shock, or it could very well have been some idiot fucking smoking in the magazine.
Yeah.
But it was definitely not sabotage, that one.
Well, yeah. Does this? Did they refloat this? I mean, it was exploded in the harbor, or did they just leave it sit there, sunk in the harbor?
No, there wasn't much left. All 4 magazines detonated on this one.
Oh wow!
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. The British attack on Ramadi, which we showed. We talked a bit about that already. Mm-hmm. Herr von Bethem-Hollweg, German Imperial Chancellor, resigns, all right, and is succeeded by Dr. Michaelius, all right. Dr. Arthur von Zimmermann, the German foreign minister, resigns, all right. Now, he is being forced to resign because the United States has entered the war, right? It's his, the Zimmermann letter that has basically brought one of the major keys for bringing the Americans into the war. Right, and so he's catching a lot of hell for this, and he's basically being made a scapegoat inside of Germany. Now, there's another problem inside of Germany as well, because there's many Germans who are beginning to suffer. And good morning, good afternoon, Aunt Jack. There's many Germans are beginning to suffer from deprivation. The blockade is doing damage to the German economy, and the Germans are feeling the pinch. And they want to sue for peace. And the government has a group of areas of hawks that want to continue the war because they've been so successful against their greatest enemy. And this is something that people have to understand. In the German perspective, their greatest enemy is the Russians. Okay, their focus has always been against the Russians. And from that perspective, when you look at it from that perspective, you come to the understanding they think they're winning the war. They are beating the hell out of the Russians. This is a successful war so far, the way that the military is looking at this. And
what they're also ignoring is what's coming from the other side.
Well, but they think that they're under the impression, right, that they can handle that if they can knock the Russians out because the Russians are the biggest threat. So you can see why this is why they're so willing to continue the war, and why they purge people, all right, like Bethen-Hollweg, who's basically saying it's time to end this. It's time to sue for peace, right? And they're basically being sidelined. These doves are basically being sidelined. Now, they're not doves in the way we think of, they're not pacifists, okay? But
pacifists are just morons. These people aren't.
Well, they just want to say we've got enough of we've won enough of our war aims here. Let's consolidate. Let's pull back and end this because we can't continue it.
Yeah, it's quick while we're ahead.
All right, on 17th of July, the proclamation issued changing the name of the British Royal House to Windsor. Can you explain that?
Yes. Basically, it was Saxe, Coburg, and Gotham before this, and these are German names. And yes, the British royal family does have its roots in German aristocracy and royalty and all this. And that mainly comes from something that they're trying to get rid of now. This is the whole point of Princess Diana, fucking can't even remember her name now. The really ugly Sheila that replaced Princess Diana, William and Kate not really being royalty, and unfortunately the goddamn Yank. Meghan Merkenhead. Fucking. Anyway.
Meghan Markle.
Yeah.
40, we love you too.
Yeah, that fucking glorified porn star. The whole point is that for hundreds and hundreds of years they've been basically interbreeding and all this kind of stuff, and they're trying to get away from that now. But back in World War One, the roots to German royalty was so great that yes, the British royals were actually German at the time. So they basically put forward a referendum to change their name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to the Windsor, and it was named after the house, the Windsor Castle. And from that point on, it was known as the House of Windsor, and they still retain that name. So you'll have Elizabeth Regina Windsor, which is Queen Elizabeth II, and then she's married to Philip Mountbatten, which is the Duke of Edinburgh, or Prince Philip. That's the reason why he's a prince and she's a queen. He was Greek royalty too. So the Charles, Andrew, and Princess Anne, they're all Mountbatten Windsors. So is William, Harry, Eugenie, fucking Beatrice, and there's a couple of others. So they're all Mountbatten Windsors as well.
Right, but it's really just more. Is this done to?
Yes, because well, everyone was sort of like, we're at war with the Germans, but we've got a German head of state, so what the hell? And okay, yep, fair enough. We'll change our name.
Okay, so this is more just more of a propaganda kind of ploy to get people on board with this.
Propaganda and patriotism, tomatoes.
Okay. All right. But, no, I can accept that. I know I can accept that. I was just because as an American, I'll be honest with you, we're like, okay, whatever. I mean, to us, it doesn't mean a lot. To us, it doesn't mean anything really.
Yeah, I know. After all, you did just have 8 years of a bloody Muslim prime minister while you're at war with Muslims. Oh, sorry, that's right. Barack Obama was Hawaiian. Oh, shit. No, he was Kenyan. Oh, fucking the Martian. Who cares?
Yeah. Okay. On that note, let's continue on. The German counteroffensive on the Eastern Front, the Battle of Galicia begins, and we will once again bring up another map here. If I can move, if it lets me move it back where I want to. There we go.
There we go.
And now we can take a look at this. This is an overall offensive by the Germans, basically aimed against the Russians. All right, you have all this line here is basically all the Germans, and then this line here are basically the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians, and what you're seeing is a series of reverses where they're pushing all along this line, and they're generally, this counterattack is very, very successful. All right, it begins to really tell, and as part of this, all right, you have a push that you'll see in a little bit here. As part of this general offensive, you're going to see Mackensen, all right, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Basically, he has now been transferred from the northern portion of this campaign over to the southern portion to take on the Romanians. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, and that's this front right here. All right, on the 19th, action at Narugumba in East Africa. All right, just basically a skirmish as far as everyone's concerned here. And then Sir Edward Carson, First Lord of the Admiralty, Great Britain, tenders his resignation. Anything to do with that?
Not entirely sure, but I think you will find that it does still have a lot to do with the lack of the successes and whatnot. We're still getting lots and lots of high casualty rates. Yes, there's Beersheba and Canberra, but as we detailed in the last episode, Canberra was actually only a very, very temporary success, and could be seen as a massive waste of time. And since tanks did come under the Board of Naval Warfare and all this kind of stuff, they were classed as land ships. They were designed by the Navy. They were initially operated by naval crews. They had naval guns on them, and naval gunnery schools taught them how to shoot and whatnot. It was seen as a naval baby. But this will change in a little bit when the Army first introduced the actual tank corps and take it under their wing.
Oh, okay. So this is a bit more involved than what I thought about it.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's more to it than what I just mentioned too. But yeah, that's a little bit of it.
Well, now, is this also part of the fallout from Jutland?
Quite possibly, yeah. As I maintained it, like it was a bit of a letdown. You sent all of these huge dreadnoughts out to go and slug it out with each other, and nothing really happened. And you know, the British did miss their cues and stuff things up a little bit, and they did get more losses than what the Germans did. So it wasn't really seen as a success at the time.
Well, what gets me about that is that, let's be honest, where were most of your losses? Most of your losses are by the one person who's considered the big hero, Admiral Beatty.
Mm.
I mean, it's his ships that were blowing up. When you think about it, it was his battle cruisers that bore the brunt of the German attack, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you send a Fiat Uno off into a tank battle.
Okay, the Reichstag passes a resolution as to German war aims. All right, now this is an attempt. This was done in an attempt, all right, to bring an end to the war. All right, basically it was intended to get the Russians, all right, to put pressure on Russia to leave the war, and then also get to try and set a reasonable tone to the Allies, especially the Americans, so that they could possibly sue for peace.
Yeah, this is sort of kind of like what was the term they used during the Vietnam War? Was it withdrawal with honor or some crap like that? Where with all the people who are asking to stop the war, the warmongers have basically gone, well, let us just do this and then we'll call it even, and then we can then say that we've won, we didn't retreat and we didn't give up and all this kind of stuff. There's a little bit to buy more time just for the warmongers in the cabinet.
Right.
Well, at this point on all sides, the people are fatigued. They're getting really tired of war.
Yeah.
Yes and no, because the Americans really haven't had a taste of it yet.
Well, yeah, because we mostly sat out the whole thing. But Germany, France, Russia, and Britain are all getting really tired of this.
Yeah, Hey, America, speak for yourselves. Love the Commonwealth.
Okay, but I'm speaking for ourselves. But one of the problems that this doesn't show anybody, all right, that isn't on this timeline, is here's where it's telling the French mutinies. The French army is mutinying. They refuse to go on the offensive. Okay? Throughout this time period, one of the things that they were expecting is that once America announced that they were going to war, they expected American troops to just start landing day and night on the French shores. There was a really serious propaganda thing that was talking about boosting up the French morale, that the Americans are coming, right, with this massive army, and they would be here tomorrow. And we don't have a massive army, not yet.
No, you don't even have experience. And as I maintain, this is what the British and the rest of the Commonwealth were trying to do, is say, no, don't listen to the French. They'll just get you all killed. Do as we say, and we'll at least try and get most of you home alive.
Well, and the French populace, though, is very disappointed because they've been promised success, and their men are dying. Now, France at this point in time has approximately 20 million. Its population is approximately 20 million people. Okay. They've already lost, now it's 20 million population. So 10 million men. Okay. And they've already lost 1 million men. You've already lost a tenth of the men in the nation due to this war. And the Germans are still on your soil. Your young men especially have died. All right. What I mean, do you realize how devastating that is? They're just looking at this going, we're all going to be dead soon. You've lost 10% of your men.
Yeah.
10% of the entire men on that you've had.
But on the other hand, too, looking at it from the outsider's perspective, the British and the Commonwealth were still losing a lot of people, but we weren't losing as much, especially the Australians, when we get to dictate what we get to do. And where the French are just attack, and don't realise until way late that doing that in front of machine guns is a really, really stupid idea.
Well, much of it is intended, all right, because they are defending their own soil, all right, and the Germans, knowing this, are basically doing things to bait it into these mass attacks so they can grind them down. And it was successful. They did for all intents and purposes, they destroyed the French morale. They destroyed the military morale of the French army. And this is why the British start taking such heavy casualties, because they have to keep up the offensive pressure, all right, as on the Germans. Otherwise, because once the Germans figure out, oh, wait a minute here, these guys, they're losing it. All right, the French army is ripe for destruction. If they'd have understood that and then said, you know what, we're just going to hold our own against the British, and we're just going to launch massive wave after wave against the French would have broken it, and the war would have been over with a loss to the Allies. It really was that close. Yeah.
Well, it's like lessons learned from that. I mean, Patton said it best. Now, no soldier ever won a war by dying for his country. You won a war by making the other bloke die for his country. And that's what the French really should have done instead of these mass wave attacks. Just sit there and let the Germans go and blunt themselves on the French wall.
Well, I mean, some of that sometimes it comes down to an attitude. Okay, back to the July 19th. M.K. Krzyzewski, all right, succeeds as Prince Love as premier of the French temporarily. Oh, one more thing. In Russia temporarily, I'm sorry. I wanted to talk about one more thing about this mutiny, so people understand how widespread this thing was, right? There were over 3,000 separate little mutiny areas, right? They had over 3,000 court martials. They can sentence to death over 500 people. All right?
Damn.
They only actually killed of the mutineers. They only killed 26 of them. But that's how widespread along the line this was. And of course, one thing that's underpinning a lot of this, the good old commies. Yes, the commie infiltration units are all through this area, where they've been most successful in Russia. All right, but there's also elements funneling through both the British and the French armies, and the French are more fertile ground for it. So that had to be stomped back out. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. All right.
Yeah, with the communists and all this kind of stuff, they're trying to unionize places. They're trying to take power away from bosses and whatnot. And if you're looking at an army, they're basically sitting there whispering in everyone's ear, like, "Why are you doing this for this bloke? He's not running out there with you. Fuck it, just go back to the chateau and have a glass of wine. Don't worry, it'll be fine." And
well, I mean, unfortunately, it's seductive, especially when you're risking your life, and you don't seem to be risking your life for anything but just a chance to die sooner. Okay, July 22nd, the Battle of Masaryk in Romania begins, and that's this right here. Okay, this is a German offensive by Mackensen. All right, now Mackensen is trying to apply pressure on the Romanians across the board, but more specifically, He's trying to knock the Russians out of the war. All right, they're trying to focus everything on the Russians on a broader scale. And this battle, even though you see them push the Romanians back, the Romanians are actually fighting very, very hard, and to the point where Mackensen says, you know what, instead of even attacking the Romanians, I'm going to try and focus completely on the Russians. And the Russians, toward the end of this battle, begin to collapse. And the Romanians take those sectors over themselves and fight the Germans back off. This is probably the best battle the Romanian army has ever fought. When it came to, at the end of this, total casualties by the Romanian Russian forces was about 20,000. For the Germans, they had over 60. The Romanians this saved Romania. Romania doesn't exist today if it wasn't for this battle and the fact that they held the line. Now they still get shit on. Okay, coming up they're going to get shit on, but there would not be a Romania if it wasn't for that. All right, Siam declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. All right, Siam, which is the forerunner of Thailand, all right, as an independent nation, actually declares war. Now, people, you know where Thailand is, okay, but they literally send 1,200 troops and military personnel, all right, to the shores of France to fight.
Which is kind of interesting because they get there pretty much right at the end of the war. They don't see any action. They don't actually fire a shot in anger. They participate in a whole bunch of victory parades and whatnot. And as a result of their valiant service through World War I and their volunteering to fight with the Allies and all this kind of stuff, we gave them a bunch of land in their independence.
Well,
so that's how they escaped colonialism.
You ensured their independence. They were still an independent nation. They were never colonized.
Yeah, that's how they escaped colonialism.
The other thing about it is they did see some combat, not a lot, granted. All right, and it was toward the end of the war because when they arrived, all right, now they're declaring war in July. We declared war much earlier on, and we're still not in the battles. Okay, so just like the United States did, they're going to have to get trained up. You know, you can't. I don't blame. What I'm saying is, I don't blame them. You know what I mean? It's not that they were trying to avoid battle or just doing it just to catch in on the glory. Okay, you know, it does help them, and they do that for lack of a better term, and they become one of the founding members of the League of Nations as a result. Mm. So it's important from Thailand's perspective. I mean, it shows that they're going on to other affairs, okay? Because it's the first time that they've had troops in another country. They've sent troops to go fight on foreign soil, completely on foreign soil, you know? Yeah. So
and you'll also find too that they're literally very, very primitive weapons, if not muzzle loaders. They're those old bloody Henry rifles from the Boer War and stuff like that. So not only do they have to be trained on, these new warfare, they have to be trained on new weapons as well.
That's very true. They are kind of backwards in that regard, like the Americans when it comes to some of that stuff. That's very true. Okay, Stanislaw, all right, and Tardapol are in Galatians are retaken by the Austro-German forces. Right, remember the offensive that we were talking about. The full Allied conference assemblies in Paris to discuss the Balkan situation with the military and naval and political committees to discuss plans in view of probable collapse of Russia. There's a realization, what are we going to do if the Russians sue for peace? All
yeah,
right.
with this, you got, the military, meaning the land army, because an air force really isn't much of a thing at this point. They're trying to think, right, how is this going to affect us when the influx of troops from the Eastern Front come running back towards us? The naval side of things will be, right when if the Germans, if these guys collapse and the Germans make a massive push and start getting things like the Black Sea Fleet and all this kind of stuff, how are we going to go deal with that? Then there's the political end of it too. Well, if they, if somehow we win and Russia gets Russia back, how are we going to deal with? Are they going to be Bolsheviks or are they going to be communist or shit?
Yeah. Okay. On July 27th, you have the agreement concluded between French and Italian governments defining the respective zones of influence in Asia Minor. This is a disaster. This agreement, all right, is what happens basically here is the Italians are claiming things that not only can't they maintain, but when the realization hits that they can't maintain it, they just basically renege on a lot of these things and leave the Italians out. And this leaves the Italians later on basically stewing because they say they were they didn't get their share of the victor spoils. They spent a lot of blood and treasure, and what did they get out of it? Well, they get basically nothing. You'll see that. The battle in East Galicia ends, and the first tank corps is formed in the British Army.
Yes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the tanks, their design, their functionality and all this kind of stuff was a naval thing at first. And initially they went to the cavalry corps. And I made mention in a previous episode that the cavalry corps were really not too happy about this because they're cavalry. They're the horsemen, they're big, proud cavalry with a lot of tradition. What's this newfangled contraption that no, we don't want it. We're cavalry, leave us alone. And as a result of that, realizing new tactics and all this, and realizing that tanks aren't really cavalry, they're a supplement to other mobile forces. They should have their own corps and then have their own tactics and training and equipment lists and things like that, logistics chains and whatnot, specifically for the tank corps. And as soon as this war ends, they do absolutely fucking nothing until the next one.
Well, but it's at least a start.
Yeah. But basically, this is the first tank corps. Like, this is the original tank corps. These are the guys who started this. You'd think that by the next war they'd be, trying out new things, doing a bit of research and development. Unfortunately, they didn't.
Yeah. The Zelsinski, all right, in Galicia is recaptured by Austro-German forces. The Battle of Ypres, all right, in the 1917s begins with the Battle of Pilkenem. Is that how you spell it?
Yeah, Pilkem Ridge.
Pilkem Ridge, and we've got a nice little ballooned up thing here. This starts with a series of explosions, does it not?
No, we've already had the explosions in the first Battle of Ypres. This is a fair ways down the track, and they did try to not do this in wet weather, and unfortunately they planned it, and like how hazard reductions go in Australia, we can plan it months in advance, but you can't guarantee it's not going to rain on the day. And of course it rained and went into a massive quagmire.
Which is what you see basically with these guys right here, unfortunately. Take a look at the mud here, folks. This guy, they're trying to carry a casualty back to an aid station, and they're in knee-deep mud. Literally slogging through knee-deep mud. You can imagine what this must have been like under the threat of artillery fire, sniper fire, machine gun fire, all right, that you're trying to carry this through.
However, it needs to be said too that, with sniper fire and machine gun fire and things like that, there were a large amount of instances where medics weren't being shot. So if someone was going out to clear a battlefield or something like that, there was I can't remember his name, Simpson. It was an Australian bloke, and he had a donkey, and it was renowned that basically every time they saw Simpson and his donkey going and picking up the wounded, they wouldn't shoot at him. And for a great deal of time, he was just moseying around the battlefield, picking up wounded and whatnot, until one day some fuckwit who didn't know what the go was saw him and went, "Oh, here, free shot, bang," and shot him. If you were carrying wounded and stuff like that, in some cases it was seen as just for general health, because they're dead bodies when they decompose and they have very dysentery and cholera and things like that. On a few battles, especially in the summer months and whatnot, the smell got that fucking bad that both sides went, "Look, we'll have 3 days to clear the battlefield. Don't shoot at each other." And then there was a few instances of like the wounded guy out in the field and he's just sitting there screaming, carrying on, like no one could actually shoot at him, and someone's yelling at the other side, "Just go fucking get him, will ya?" There were a few instances like that.
Yeah, no, I can believe that. There's one more thing that I would like to point out there. If you take a quick look at right here. What do you see? You see these guys are all carrying gas masks. All right, and these are at least now proper gas masks. They're not expecting these troops anymore to, pee in their freaking bandanas and stick it around their faces.
And another interesting little side note too, it's not completely obvious, but these are Aussies.
Oh, are they?
Yep.
So you've actually got some decent equipment for once?
Oh no, we've always had the decent equipment. It's just it took time for the decent equipment to actually appear.
I see. Okay, my mistake. My mistake. Okay, let's take a look at the map here. You sent the pictures of the map that you wanted to look at.
Mm-hmm. All
right, here's the map.
Okay, this is I think it's the 51st Corps. These are the British lines of advance. The French are, I believe, up north, and the Australians were down south of these positions. And let's see.
And you're pushing this way, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Basically to the east of the map.
Yes, that's correct.
Assuming that the north is going on there. Okay.
Now, the British commander at the time was a fellow called Gough, and he was trying to make it east. It was clear that the plateau needed to be captured before further attempts were made to push on rollers. With the Second Army facing a challenge on the plateau, Haig replaced Gough with a fellow called Plummer. Now, Plummer's not a dumbass. The operational commander of the offensive, Plummer's first task was to capture Gulvet Plateau. As a commander, the Plummer took a more limited methodology. Yeah, that one. Approach to can't fucking talk this morning. To the operations than Gough. He demanded more time to prepare more artillery. Haig granted both. Plummer asked for 3 weeks to prepare for the second stage of the offensive. Haig agreed. Plummer outlined his plan on 29th of August that he wanted to use 10 and 1 Corps, Anzac Corps, to attack Gulvet Plateau with 2 Corps in reserve. The attack would be in 4 phases, with a 6-day pause in between each operation to allow time for artillery and supplies and fresh troops to move forward. Each assault would be conducted to a maximum depth of no more than 1,500 metres, so as not to exceed the limit of cover provided by artillery. Having gained their objectives, the infantry would dig in and smash any German counter-offensive. This strategy of bite and hold, in which the infantry advanced behind creeping barrage, was ideal of the set-piece operation, one that Haig pushed aside in planning the broader offensive in favour of something grander. So you can see there where someone's going, hang on, these fucking Aussies and this walking fire and all this kind of stuff, like that works. Yeah, we'll do that. And then Haig's just come along and went, yeah, that's good now. Yeah, look at my big battle.
Great. And, great. Let me pat you on the head. Okay, let's go and do this.
And the major problem with Ypres and Flanders and Passchendaele and all that kind of stuff. It was initially when the battles first started. These were lovely manicured farming fields and stuff like that had irrigation trenches and stuff like that for drainage and whatnot. And oh yes, no worries, we can run across that, not a problem. That's not so much when you churn it up and then rain on it for a couple of months and then there's no drainage anymore, and yeah,
turn it into a mud pile.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, end of the first phase of the Battle of Mariceti. General Kornilov succeeds General Brusilov as the Russians' commander-in-chief. You're going to see this happening quite a bit. The Pope sends note to belligerent governments appealing for peace.
And General Kornilov succeeds General Brusilov, and then they have a Valium and Popov.
Battle of Pilkum ends. Pilkum, is that what you said? Pilkum? Pilkum, okay. The German commerce raider Seatter, all right, wrecked in Mopila Island in the Pacific. All right, this is probably one of the few things that the Germans actually kind of did right, which was they had a number of different commerce raiders run around the Pacific until basically they were hunted down.
Pretty much. There is actually an island in the Pacific. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the only last remaining vestige of the old German Federation of World War One.
Yeah,
it's still officially that.
Then you have a mutiny breaking out of the German High Seas Fleet in Wilhelmshaven. Right, this was almost a carbon copy of the Soviets, the Russian fleet, where they basically mutinied. Right, the difference is the Germans put it down. All right.
Yeah.
The Germans put it down, and in some cases, quite harshly, I should say. Okay, but this was a blow. Believe it or not, this was a major blow to the Kaiser Wilhelm because he loved the fleet. He truly loved the fleet. He thought of himself in many ways as being more aligned with the British maritime mentality than anything else. All right, he never thought of himself necessarily as part of that Prussian aristocracy, right, to that degree. So this was actually something that affected him on a personal level.
Well, that was also something that was spawned on by things like dreadnoughts and whatnot. In one stroke, the dreadnought made every other battleship obsolete, and Britain was trying to build a force that was bigger than their next two threats, and one of those was Germany. And once you basically started building dreadnoughts, all anybody else had to do was just scrap basically every ship they had before, or not worry about maintaining them, and just start building dreadnoughts and just keep up with the British. And that's exactly what the Kaiser had done. And with the mutiny, however, this was majorly as a result of Jutland as well, because, well, to the sailors, well, we won that one, so why don't we go out and give them another kicking? And but they weren't being sent out again because they didn't want to risk losing large numbers of their fleets.
Well, and that's exactly what was going to happen if they did. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
All right. They were not in a position to sustain this in any way, shape, or form. They were not going to sustain it at all.
Well, especially now, considering that the other biggest navy that the British were trying to outmatch was the United States Navy, and now the United States Navy is coming in on the side of the British, and now the Germans just absolutely can't keep up.
Right, there's no chance. For all intents and purposes, their participation in the war is, for all intents and purposes, over. All right, they're only there basically to minimize basically to tamp down what is possible for the British, right? For all intents and purposes, because if the British go hog wild, then they can escape. But the British are never going to do that. So it does tie down British forces, but from a defensive perspective, or an offensive perspective rather, they're done. They're out of the war.
Well, what's funny about the that German raider, that the Seatter, is that the German raiders, the Q ships, were way more effective than any of the battleships ever were, especially on the German side during World War One.
Well, they definitely racked up more kills. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right. So from that perspective, you're 100% right. They were more effective. They definitely had more of an impact. But let's be honest, how much was that impact really? It was still pretty minor.
It was enough to have us want to chase them down.
Well, you've got to do something about them. I agree, but I mean, as far as what was the total impact, though, come on.
Well, the Q ships did get to the Pacific, where this was like an entire world away. The subs never even got anywhere near, halfway across the Atlantic at that point in time, and the battleships are stuck in harbour, and now you've got like Q ships that are projecting on the other side of the world, on the antipole of the planet.
Yeah, the subs just don't have the range. Let's be honest.
Oh, of course.
Right, so there wasn't much in the way that they could actually accomplish from that perspective. At least that's how I see it now. All right. Anyway, let's continue. Cernovich, Bokanovia, all right, retaken by the Austria-Hungarian forces, or Austria-German forces, rather. Mutiny. Oh, we already did that one. Okay, I'm sorry. Liberia declares war on Germany. Liberia doesn't really do much, okay, but it does give a logistic point to the British, all right, that they didn't have before.
Yeah, Liberia doesn't do much until the mid to late 1990s, and then that was only with their neighbour.
Right. So
they didn't have Charles Taylor at this point.
Okay, you're being a bit brutal there, dude. But carry on. Baron de Broqueville, I'm not trying to butcher this, as resigns as Belgian Minister for Bear. I don't know what the hell that means. Right, and succeeds Baron Bayens as Minister for Foreign Affairs. Did the Belgians really do? I mean, how much were involved in did the Belgians were they involved in this? I mean, they got conquered. They got conquered. Yeah. They fought to got conquered, and I know they continued to field some troops so that they existed. Let's be honest, but what could they really do? Let's be perfectly frank here.
The Navy did get some ships out, and they did join the British fleet. There were a lot of blokes that did, like the soldiers did get out, and I think you'll find there were some Belgian regiments and whatnot that we did field in France, particularly. And some of them did volunteer to join the Air Corps, but that's mainly all that they really did. It was like the Second World War; they were knocked out in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that they were there. I mean, and they did provide. Now, in the First World War, they provide much more of a stopgap than the Second World War. The Second World War, they're not even a doormat. I mean, let's be honest. They succeeded at dying honorably very quickly in the Second World War.
Yeah, well, you'll find a country, particularly like Belgium, because there's such a pushover that doesn't really leave a lot of chance for a lot of guys to get out. And so, like with something like the French, the Free French and all that kind of stuff, we did evacuate quite a few French people from Dunkirk and things like that. The Belgians just never had that opportunity in both ends.
I honestly think, and I said this before, I honestly think that the Germans, or the French, at the point of Dunkirk, they really betrayed the British, right? And I don't mean the French soldiers at Dunkirk, which fought a magnificent rearguard action, but the politicians for the French. You call up and you go, "Oh, it's over," and it's like, "What do you mean it's over?" At that point, this is what gets them the name surrender monkeys. Let's be honest, right? Yeah. They could have redeployed. They could have continued the battle. They could have learned the lessons from the first part of the battle, where they got fooled and they got wrecked, but they were so concerned. The French politicians, and I'm serious about this, they were so concerned by the Germans fighting into Paris that when they lost that portion of the battle, they rolled.
Yeah. Oh, well,
They
capital's
just rolled
gone.
over.
There's nothing we can do. Bullshit. You still got half a country.
They still had a massive field army, and the army wasn't really defeated per se. I mean, it still had a lot of firepower. It still had I mean, it wasn't like they were totally outmatched. They were, how do I say this? They were outmaneuvered. Granted, okay. They then had a hard road to hoe, but to just surrender like they did, I mean.
Well, in that case, in that instance too, there still was a lot of this, pumping forces bullshit into it, and trying to get others to do a lot of the work for them. There's two blokes in the Royal Air Force. There was Bomber Harris and Sir Hugh Dowding, and Bomber Harris, obviously, he advocated for bombers and wanted all the resources for bombers because the bomber will always make it through was his motto. And Hugh Dowding was saying, no, we need to put resources into fighter planes and things like that. And in the lead up to Dunkirk, the French were still screaming for the Royal Air Force to send all of their fighters over and, come on, you need to protect us, come on, this kind of shit. And fucking, it was at one point where Hugh Dowding went, look, if we send any more fighters over and they lose, because that looks like it's going to be on the cards, we won't have anything to defend ourselves with. And thankfully Churchill went, yeah, you're right. Okay, frogs, sorry, no more fighter planes. It's lots of tactics and shit like that. You're sort of like, hang on, didn't we do this 20 years ago?
Well, I understand that, but I mean, it's let's be frank here. I mean, the French after World War I were a beaten people, and when it comes to warfare, they're gun shy. They become very, very gun shy. Understandably, don't get me wrong. I understand a lot of it, but at the same time, to roll like they did. Now we're talking World War II, where we're getting away from where we were. All right, let's get back to Herr Richard von Kluman. Is that how you say that? Appointed German foreign minister, and this basically is just a continuation of the purging of the doves. All right. Second phase of the Battle of Maserati begins. Like I said, Mackensen is now trying to redeploy to try and just kick the crap out of the Russians. All right, to try and enforce them out. Krzyzewski is definitively appointed Prime Minister of Russia. Count Erzhasi, the Hungarian premier, resigns because Hungary has basically been, shown the door.
Mm-hmm.
And then on August 10th, yes, indeedy, all right, the British Labour Party decides to send delegates to the Consultative Conference at Stockholm. And the British government's response is, we're not giving you passports. Now, what's this all about? Well, these are the communists. This is a communist/socialist conference that the Labour Party is basically trying to push. Okay, and I shouldn't say the entire Labour Party. Elements of the Labour Party, and basically the ones in control, are socialists, and the socialists are pushing for an end to the war. These are the let's get out of the war group, all right, trying to push Britain out of the war.
Well, you say partial communist. See, that's the thing.
I said partial Labour Party. They're communists, okay?
Yes,
I'm not going to deny that.
As the name suggests, and it's the same in Australia as it is in Britain, the Labor Party is the Workers' Party, or Labour, as in like doing labour tasks and stuff like that. And the Workers' Party, the People's Party. Therefore, they are communist. They just really don't like it when you call them a commie.
But they are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are.
The only thing is that, though, we've got a democratic society and all this kind of stuff, so they can't actually come out and say, we're communists and we're going to have dictatorships and all this kind of stuff. And,
Well, they
Because
have.
that's also another beauty of having a royal as a head of state, is that if one of them did do that, especially say in Australia, the Labor Party gets in and say, right, this is going to be a dictatorship, we're going to be a banana republic now. It's like, excuse me, Mr. Governor General, can you go and have a chat to Mum? And she'll find that shit out and say, off with his head.
Yeah, I've been trying to catch up on 8 Jack. Well, in Korea, they hunted down and killed all the royal family so you could for betraying us to the Japanese.
Well, it's not my fault our queen didn't suck up to the Japs.
No, it's not it's not that. You guys have a tendency of forcing your royals to abdicate when they get too freaking froggy, so, which is quite understandable. But then you just put in somebody, you just replace them with another royal rather than say, okay, it's at the end of the royal line. You just say, okay, you abdicate, and here's the royal that we're following now, which is quite British.
It's not when they get a bit froggy. It's usually when they marry bloody Yanks.
Well, it does seem to have a trend there. I can't deny that.
Hey, you guys wanted a monarchy. You had your chance a couple of 100 years ago, but you blew that one.
Hey, just because she married or he or she marries a royal, all right, doesn't that's on them. Americans are all about individual freedom, dude. All right, back to this. China declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. Right, but they don't send any troops. At least the people, the Thais, they sent troops over. What did the Chinese do? Nothing. All right. Now, granted, this is basically a puppet kind of thing from Japan, but still. All right. Battle at Hill 70 at Lens begins, and the Battle of Langermark, right, which is still part of the battle for Ypres, correct?
Yeah, it's still part of the Flanders offensive. Yeah.
Right. And it's this offensive that is saving the French. Flat out.
And that one I think we should do a bit more in depth on a later episode.
Okay, we can talk about that.
Because that's really involved.
We'll talk about that. All right, the 11th Battle of Isonzo begins, which it's in Italy. The Italians are trying to battle through the mountains. They are not succeeding. They are just basically throwing people into a meat grinder. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just a meat grinder.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the Battle of Ypres ends, or the Battle of Langemark ends with Ypres. The British, the French, and Italian governments conclude a provisional arrangement with regard to future policy in Asia Minor.
It's basically chopping up their bloody colonies and saying, right, well, if we win, who gets the German ones? Okay.
The second offensive Battle of Verdun begins. All right. This is not much of an offensive battle. All right.
No.
This is just an attempt to try and smooth out some of the bulges in the line. Very limited, very, very limited objectives. All right. And it's just a matter of trying to prove that there's offensive capability in the French. All right. But it's not even close to what it used to be.
If anything, it's also trying to show the Germans that no, you need to stay where you are, because us French are still really mean and nasty people, and we're going to come and get you if you pull out and go to someplace else where they're having some successes.
Okay. Dr. Vrkel is appointed the Hungarian premier. German L-ship L-23 is destroyed in the North Sea. The Ministry of Reconstruction is formed in Great Britain. So they're already created a ministry for how things are going to be after the end of the war. Is that what this is?
Pretty well much. See, most wars previous to this go back to the Boer War and the Napoleonic Wars and stuff like that. A lot of guys who were pressed into service, not so much conscripted. It was more that they were conned into going into service. Once the war was over, there was no jobs. There was nothing else for them to do. They had bugger all money if they survived. If they're invalid and stuff like that, well, then they're doubly useless. So it wasn't like they could come back and start their own business or anything like that. A lot of these guys were only skilled at how to fire a rifle and march in a straight line. And that was basically it. For a lot of these guys, it was the only thing they knew because they didn't go to school, and this was literally the first thing that anyone had ever got them to do as soon as they were old enough. And they'd realised this with the amount of wounded and invalids that were coming back, and guys missing limbs and half their faces and things like that. They started realising, oh, hang on a minute. We kind of really do need to look after these guys, or else we're going to have a whole bunch of, mangled people just sitting on the side of the road begging for coins. And this is where you'll find that, war service pensions and things like that came in. Repatriation hospitals and whatnot. Not so much that, but even in, say, France and Germany, Belgium, Austria and all this, if indeed, we win this one, we're going to have to try and start boosting other economies and all this kind of stuff so that they don't become welfare states and go broke like what Germany did in fact do in between the two wars. So they were looking at a lot of things like that with the reconstruction part. It doesn't actually just mean rebuilding the buildings that the Germans have bombed.
Okay, the last German airplane raid on England by daylight. So we're not going to lose any more troops or planes just trying to raid England when they can see it coming, because the air defense now has caught up to this, correct?
Mm-hmm. And the term raid is also pretty telling as well. This is like the last one or two going around trying to scare people by making things go bang at random. From now on, there's not just going to be night raids, but they're going to be concerted efforts. So we're going to have, sort of Battle of Britain style bomber formations, or 1,000 bomber raids, but not so much 1,000 bombers. But you get my point.
1,000 bomb raid.
1,000 hand grenade raid.
Well, which is basically what they're doing. And then the Battle of Hill, and it says Bill, but I believe it's supposed to be Hill 70 ends. All right. So, and that pretty much takes us to the end of August.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, one of the things that's going to be coming up very soon, of course, is the Russia is going to be taken out of the war. All right, and that's coming. There's going to be riots in Russia, and we're going to be doing when Mad Dog returns. We're holding off until Mad Dog returns. The Russian Revolution and what it entailed in a much broader, more in-depth kind of a look. All right, we haven't done that yet, but we're planning on doing that. So that's what we can expect going on in the future. So I think that we're ready to wrap this up here today, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Anything else you want to
add? No. For the most part, I think we covered everything that I wanted to. It's just at this point in time, though, the thing to remember is we're really only a year away, a little year and a couple months away from the end of the war. All right, so the war is going to wrap up very quickly in comparison to how long it's been going on. It's been going on since 1914. It's been a long time coming, but the end is coming. The end is in sight.
The only thing is, nobody knew this at the time.
That's true. That is true. All right, but you're going to see the final efforts of both of the exhausted Allies and the exhausted Germans making their final attempts to try and end this war. All right, to their advantage, because what is happening to the Pope's attempt to cause a renegotiation, it was naive, because what the Allies want and what the Axis wants, or the Central Powers in this case, I'm sorry not called the Axis, but it's not the Axis, the Central Powers want. The Central Powers think that from their perspective, they've won. Mm-hmm. Right? If you take a look at, and I'm serious about this, the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, and even the Ottoman Turks, their biggest enemy to this point in their minds, their greatest threat were the Russians, and they've beaten the Russians. And they've being beaten in pretty handily.
Yeah.
So,
well, can you imagine how things would have gone for the Kaiser and all this kind of stuff if everyone underneath him went, yeah, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. No, we're just lost. You know, the fucking heads would fucking roll. So they absolutely kind of have to sort of try and bullshit their people into saying, yeah, whatever loses, we actually have. No, it's actually a victory.
well, and that's true. Unfortunately, that's true. So,
all right.
All
Well, join us hopefully next week, and we'll go up and we'll go talk about the Russian Revolution. Hopefully, when Dodgers finish trampling around the countryside.
well, I personally don't think that Mad Dodge will be back, but we can hope. We'll have to wait and see. We'll play that a little bit by ear. It'll either be that or we will continue in September. How does that sound?
Yeah. Well, if not, yes, we'll do that. Anyway, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Babies.